I remember Larry Gordon called me in to the studio. He said, "Hey, I hear you want to do Waterworld." And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he says, "It's fantastic." He goes, I know this actor that really wants to do it too." And I'm like, "Who's that?" And he goes, "Kevin Costner." I'm like, "I'm not interested."
It makes no damn sense. Compels me though.
Before Titanic set sail into Oscar glory, before Avatar turned the world into a Smurf rave, there was Waterworld, a film so infamously chaotic, so apocalyptically expensive. It practically soaked Hollywood in panic. This wasn't just a movie. It was a floating monument to hubris, a soggy Icarus flapping its wings too close to the sun, and then plunging headfirst into a typhoon of logistical nightmares, spiraling budgets, and, well, typhoons. But how, you might ask, does a film with one of the most ambitious sci-fi premises of the decade, an entire world swallowed by rising oceans, pirates on catamarans, Kevin Costner with gills, go from exciting post-apocalyptic epic to an industry-wide cautionary tale whispered in studio boardrooms? What alchemy of ego, bad planning, and saltwater turned a promising blockbuster into a mess where the set literally sank and the director walked the plank? Well, grab your floatation device, because what follows is the tale of a production so cursed it made the movie Heaven's Gate look fiscally responsible. There were cost overruns, on-set hurricanes, stunt injuries, ego clashes, a director mutiny, and a lead actor so determined to control the film that he practically became Poseidon by the end. And yes, somewhere in the chaos, there's a jet ski chase that costs more than your average movie. Hey guys, what's happening? Nihat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we're breaking down the catastrophic production nightmare that was the making of Waterworld. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification icon to stay up to date on all the latest content, and click the like button to help appease the algorithm gods. Also, if you'd like to make a suggestion on what you want me to cover next, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments below.
I think anybody with a brain, okay, and those are the people we're counting on who come to Waterworld, would understand that your job is made twice as tough when it's on the water.
So I figured it out. Why hot dogs come in packages of 10 and hot dog buns come in packages of 8. See, the thing is that life doesn't always work out according to plan. So be happy with what you got, so you can always get a hot dog.
The pitch was to imagine Mad Max, but wetter.
Oh my.
A lot wetter, like everything is ocean wetter. Humanity is adrift, civilization has collapsed, and the last survivors now live on floating metal rafts powered by wind, piss, and sheer desperation. There's no land, no law, and absolutely no sunscreen. Welcome to Waterworld, where the polar ice caps have melted. Earth is now a big salty bathtub, and dry land is more myth than memory. It's the kind of high-concept elevator pitch that probably sounded brilliant during the first 5 minutes of a Hollywood lunch meeting powered by cocaine. A gritty, post-apocalyptic survival story set entirely at sea, with pirates, slaves, humans evolving into fish, and Kevin Costner drinking his own recycled urine. Yes, that really happens. The internal shorthand for the film was Mad Max on water, and frankly, they should have taken the hint that even George Miller didn't try to shoot Mad Max in the middle of the bloody Pacific. A young Harvard graduate named Peter Radar pitched the script to Roger Corman's company. Corman, being a man who knew his way around a budget, politely declined with the legendary quote, "Are you out of your mind?" But Radar, clearly operating on a potent cocktail of optimism and salt fumes, wrote the script anyway. And wouldn't you know it, Universal Pictures snapped it up via Largo Entertainment and decided, hey, let's give this thing a massive budget and throw Kevin Costner at it. Because what could possibly go wrong? Spoiler alert, everything. At this point, Kevin Costner was the golden boy of Hollywood. He came aboard Waterworld not just as the star, but as the producer, which meant he had the power to override everyone from the director to the guy making the coffee. And when your leading man is also bankrolling the thing, suddenly no one's brave enough to say, "Hey Kev, maybe we don't need the 10-story floating fortress built out of actual steel in the middle of the ocean." Universal originally wanted people like Robert Zemeckis or Lawrence Kasdan to direct, but Costner insisted on bringing in his Robin Hood Prince of Thieves buddy Kevin Reynolds. He even threatened to walk if Reynolds wasn't hired. That should have been red flag number 1. The original budget was $65 million, then got bumped up to $100 million. Not exactly pocket change, and already one of the most expensive movies of all time, but that would balloon further. What began as a bold experiment in world building quickly became a masterclass in how not to manage a film set or your lead actor's god complex. Before we dive into the catastrophic production, a quick refresher on the film for the uninitiated. Set in a future where the polar ice caps have melted and turned Earth into one giant puddle, humanity now survives by floating around on rusted oil drums, ships and tankers, drinking their own filtered piss.
Let it go, let it go.
And hoping the mythical dry land isn't just another bedtime story. It's a gritty, sun-scorched aquatic dystopia where the only thing rarer than land is a consistent tone, and the only lore is jet skis and poorly explained world building. Our hero is the Mariner, played by Kevin Costner, with all the emotional range of damp driftwood. He's a lone drifter who sails the open sea on a tricked-out trimaran that looks like it was built out of bicycle parts and fishing nets. He's gruff, unsociable, and oh yes, has gills behind his ears and webbed feet. He's a mutant, a water-breathing loner in a world that barely bathes. Basically, he's Aquaman if Aquaman hated everyone and never smiled.
10, 20.
You talk a lot.
The plot kicks off when the Mariner arrives at a floating city called the Atoll, hoping to trade dirt, which in this universe is more valuable than gold. Unfortunately, the locals don't take kindly to fishmen, so naturally they throw him into a cage of rancid water to die. But wouldn't you know it, the atoll is then attacked by smokers, pirates on jet skis and small ships with machine guns led by the Deacon, played by Dennis Hopper, doing his best impression of a half-blind televangelist who spent too long in the sun. Deacon is one of the few characters who actually seems to enjoy being in this film. He chews the scenery like it's made of beef jerky and is delightfully unhinged, almost charming.
You know, I thought you were stupid, friend. But I underestimated you. You were a total freaking retard.
Why is that awesome?
The Deacon is hunting for a little girl named Enola, who has a tattoo on her back that leads to dry land. With her is Helen, played by Jeanne Tripplehorn, her guardian, who is saddled with very little to do beyond looking concerned and arguing with the Mariner.
She can cook, she can fish.
So can I.
Our guild anti-hero reluctantly agrees to help them, though he spends most of the movie grunting, sulking, and threatening to throw Enola overboard, which honestly feels like a metaphor for the script. Eventually, the trio set sail on a scrap boat and begin a journey across the endless ocean, dodging smokers, bonding awkwardly, and learning that trust is just as rare as dry socks in this world. What follows is a string of action sequences involving harpoons, bungee cords, planes, and more explosions than a Michael Bay fireworks sale. The smokers give chase in their Exxon Valdez-themed death barge, which Deacon commands like some kind of nautical cult leader. Costner becomes emotionally available for half a scene before brooding again, and they escape the clutches of the Deacon and his cult.
Oh no, quick! What are we gonna do?
Tie this off.
Eventually, they find dry land and apparently nobody else thought to sail in that direction. It's the top of Mount Everest, overgrown with vegetation and filled with horses, which raises all kinds of questions about climate science. The film ends with Enola safe, Helen redeemed, and the Mariner realizing he doesn't belong on land because gills. So he sails off into the distance like a moist Clint Eastwood, looking for the next overpriced disaster to helm. This would come in the form of the postman just 2 years later, by the way.
Peter, I got some money from South Africa. If you come up with a good Mad Max ripoff, I'll let you direct it. This is the era of the AFM where everyone was doing Mad Max ripoffs. That was the easiest genre movie to pull off.
Waterworld's development was hell. A part of the filmmaking process where good ideas went to die and bad ideas were given $175 million. The movie didn't start out as a disaster, mind you. The script had potential. A lone drifter sails a post-apocalyptic ocean and world, dodging pirates and searching for the mythical promise of dry land. Simple, gritty, potentially cheap. But then someone at Universal said the fateful words, "Let's give this to Kevin Costner." Now this was peak Costner, the early 90s post-Dances with Wolves Costner, the kind of Costner who just won Best Picture, Best Director, and a lifetime supply of self-confidence. He wasn't just a leading man, he was a cinematic messiah in a mullet. So of course he wasn't just content with a lean little survival thriller. No, he wanted more. Bigger sets, more stunts, more explosions, and definitely more Kevin Costner. David Twohy was brought in to rewrite the script and add a bit more meat to the bones. Which he did, to be fair, though somewhere between revisions, the bones were replaced with bloated, waterlogged whales. Action sequences were added, new characters were introduced, subtlety was yeeted overboard. What was once a taut, mid-budget concept had mutated into a nautical epic so grand in scale it needed its own shipping lanes. Production began without a finished script. Scenes were being rewritten on the fly, sometimes overnight, and often by Costner himself. Universal greenlit the project expecting a tight shoot, a bit of open water, a few floating platforms, and 2 months of filming. What they got was a 6-month shoot, the cinematic equivalent of a cruise ship catching fire mid-voyage and slowly drifting into bankruptcy. Reynolds tried to steer the ship, but almost immediately, creative differences started bubbling to the surface. You see, Reynolds thought he was directing a film. Costner thought he was directing a monument to himself. And when your star is also your producer and he's making demands like rewrite this entire act, add more action here, and build me a custom trimaran with a retractable sail and a mood lighting system, well, you can imagine how that played out. It's like trying to direct a movie while your lead actor is simultaneously holding the steering wheel, the camera, the catering schedule, and a shotgun.
I started blasting. Bang!
If the development was bad, production was a nightmare. A bloated, sun-burnt, wave-tossed catastrophe with a camera crew. Let's begin with set construction chaos, because the logic behind it is truly something to behold. What's ironic is that Costner asked Steven Spielberg if he had any advice about shooting in the ocean, and Spielberg warned Costner in no uncertain terms, do not shoot in the ocean. Do all your coverage in a studio tank or a stage, and use a second unit to do a couple of shots on water. Spielberg had barely survived Jaws and knew the ocean was a cruel, vengeful mistress, but Costner ignored that advice like it was a tax bill and everything Spielberg warned about came true. Rather than shoot on a nice controlled soundstage like Titanic eventually would, they decided to build a real floating post-apocalyptic city in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The atoll set weighed over 1,000 tons, took 3 months to assemble, cost $22 million to construct, and was anchored just off the coast of Hawaii. And then in a truly poetic twist of fate, it was immediately destroyed by a tropical storm and sank. Because of course it did. That's what happens when you build an entire bloody film set on the open ocean. The production had to fish it out and rebuild it. Meanwhile, the script went through several more rewrites. They also decided to build 2 30-foot trimarans, which cost $500,000 each, multiple ships, and a replica of Exxon Valdez. Somewhere along the way, they forgot they were making a film, not constructing Atlantis. Filming was constantly delayed by storms, rough seas, and surprise wind gusts that turned dialogue scenes into wind tunnel ASMR. Saltwater got into everything. Cameras, microphones, lunchboxes, probably Costner's ego, and damaged thousands of dollars worth of equipment. The sun roasted the crew alive, and even on a good day, continuity was a complete fantasy. The ocean moves, you see, so a scene shot at 10 AM looked absolutely nothing like the one shot at 10:15 AM. Even simple shots became logistical nightmares. The makeup crew was on a separate boat, and by the time they ferried over, touched up Costner's salt-blasted face and got out of frame, the camera boats had drifted, and the entire shot was unusable. The wind would also ruffle Costner's hair between takes, forcing resets. You could practically see the budget being swept out to sea. One 10-minute action sequence involving 50 villains on jet skis took about a month to film, which is almost half the amount of time Universal had greenlit for them to shoot the entire film. And logistics.
What the hell is even that?
The set had no bathrooms, meaning the entire cast and crew had to be ferried back and forth by boat. That's right, the whole operation functioned like a porta-potty version of Dunkirk. Want to change your camera lens or pee? That's a 2-hour boat trip and a prayer to Neptune. Joss Whedon was brought in to rewrite dialogue toward the end of the shoot. Whedon described the job as 7 weeks of hell, calling himself the world's highest-paid stenographer. According to him, by the time he arrived, the last 40 pages had no water in them at all, and no one was in control, except Costner, who'd rewritten large chunks of the script that no one else was allowed to change. Now let's talk injuries, because Waterworld had a number of them. Kevin Costner, ever the hands-on leading man, nearly died when a paragliding stunt went sideways and left him dangling mid-air for over 30 minutes in open water. Cast and crew got seasick and suffered multiple injuries on set due to accidents. The stuntmen got stung by jellyfish. Tsunami warnings shut down production multiple times, and stunt coordinator Norman Howell was literally swept out to sea and had to be rescued. Honestly, at this point, I'm amazed they didn't lose the craft services guy to a shark attack. To top it all off, Costner's stunt double had to be airlifted to a hospital after suffering an embolism. Meanwhile, Costner himself was in the middle of a very public divorce, which I'm sure made him very pleasant to be around. The cast and crew were suffering from burnout, delays, and the sort of morale that usually precedes mutiny. Equipment kept breaking, reshoots piled up, tempers frayed, and through it all, Kevin Costner was micromanaging every single aspect of the production. At this point, the budget was bleeding out like a harpooned whale, the ocean was actively trying to murder everyone, and the film's creative team had all the cohesion of football fans in a bar fight. But just when you thought things couldn't get worse, along came the meltdowns. Costner, our fearless mariner turned mogul, who, while the crew were busy getting sunstroke on a floating death trap, was reportedly living in a $4,500 a night luxury villa, complete with a private butler, chef, and probably a man hired specifically to moisturize his gills. Meanwhile, the rest of the production was eating lukewarm sandwiches and praying they wouldn't get electrocuted by sea-soaked lighting rigs. Nothing boosts morale quite like watching a star helicopter in from his air-conditioned fortress while you're peeling barnacles off the catering table. One by one, key department heads began mysteriously disappearing from the call sheets. Fired, replaced, or just plain walked off, never to be seen again. The revolving door of talent behind the camera meant that nobody knew who was actually in charge of what, except of course for Kevin Costner, who was in charge of everything. Eventually, Universal executives, including Sidney Sheinberg, Tom Pollock, and Casey Silver, flew in to see the train wreck for themselves. Desperate to stop the bleeding, they started cutting stunts and scenes, including one where Deacon was supposed to land a plane on the Valdez. Costner even had to agree to forfeit his gross points until the movie made its money back, which is kind of like handing back your parachute after you've jumped. The now fragile relationship between Costner and director Kevin Reynolds had completely gone overboard by this point. What began as a professional collaboration had degenerated into a petty, ego-driven pissing contest that played out daily in front of the entire crew. Arguments were constant, decisions were reversed overnight, and somewhere in the chaos, the film itself seemed to get lost. Scenes were being rewritten on the spot. Often in the morning they were scheduled to shoot, meaning the cast would show up, read new lines they'd never seen before, and be expected to deliver emotional gravitas while standing on a swaying platform of wet plywood. The phrase script in progress doesn't quite capture it. This was a script in freefall, ripped apart, patched together, and rewritten on waterlogged paper while jet skis circled in the background like sharks smelling blood. Reynolds had put up with Costner's micromanagement for most of the production, but when his 2-hour, 40-minute cut was rejected by Costner, things came to a head. Costner claimed he didn't like the wall-to-wall action, while Reynolds thought Costner only cared about polishing his own screen time. Unsurprisingly, Costner took over the editing room. The tension between him and the director finally exploded, and Reynolds, after months of being second-guessed, overruled, and probably fantasizing about a career in inland farming, quit the film entirely before it was finished, citing those all-too-familiar words, creative differences. His parting line: in the future, Costner should only appear in pictures he directs himself. That way, he can always be working with his favorite actor and his favorite director. As for the budget, what started as a relatively sane $65 million began to balloon faster than a drowning man in a wetsuit. By the time the dust had settled, or rather the ocean spray, Waterworld had racked up a jaw-dropping $175 million price tag, making it the most expensive film ever made at the time. And that's $375 million today, adjusted for inflation. That's not a blockbuster, that's a financial tsunami.
One thing we like in the film business is about control. And that's something you can't control. It's a viscous environment. It's incredibly challenging.
And I really didn't quite understand what the difficulty could be. I don't think anybody can until you go through it.
By the time Waterworld finally limped into cinemas, it was a public spectacle. The press had been circling for months, gleefully sharpening their knives. Industry insiders were whispering about its monstrous budget. Crew members were leaking horror stories like a cracked hull. Long before a single soggy frame hit the screen, the film had been slapped with not one, but two gloriously vicious nicknames. Fishtar, a nod to the legendary box office belly flop Ishtar, and Kevin's Gate, a reference to Heaven's Gate, the cinematic disaster that torpedoed United Artists and became Hollywood shorthand for bloated ego meets financial ruin. Subtle, they were not. When Waterworld finally hit theaters in 1995, it was #1 at the box office for 2 weeks, grossing $88 million domestically and $176 million internationally. This might sound impressive until you remember it cost at least $175 million to make, not including marketing and distribution costs, and the fact that Universal only made between 40 to 60% of box office revenue depending on where it was released. This meant it had to make roughly $400 to $500 million to break even, which it most certainly did not. Critically, the film was met with a resounding chorus of meh. Reviews were mixed. On the one hand, some folks appreciated the world building. Yes, it looked expensive because it was, and the practical effects were undeniably impressive. The floating sets, the stunt work, the water battles, it all had a grubby, handmade charm. But on the other hand, the plot had no depth, the characters were flatter than driftwood, and Kevin Costner delivered a performance so wooden it could have doubled as a canoe. Audiences weren't quite sure whether to be impressed, confused, or mildly seasick.
What happened is we got deeper into the production and, we fell behind and it was getting expensive. All this negative press. The powers that be, people were anxious to prove that something was being done to address it. Some people wanted to cut things out of the script, to try to stay on schedule. Other people wanted things left back in.
The legacy of Waterworld is almost as bizarre as the film itself. First off, Waterworld somehow ended up inspiring one of the most successful theme park attractions Universal Studios ever built. That's right, the Waterworld stunt show has been running for decades across multiple parks, and it's honestly better paced, more fun, and features more coherent character arcs than the film it's based on. But even more surprising is the film's slow burn cult following on home video and streaming. As for Costner, well, he managed to recover. Kind of. Until he decided to do it all over again with The Postman, another bloated, self-directed, post-apocalyptic epic that no one asked for. Because if there's one thing Costner learned from Waterworld, it's clearly nothing. But hey, at least The Postman wasn't shot in the ocean. Waterworld wasn't a disaster because the idea was bad. It was a disaster because no one said no. It was a monument to unchecked ego, flawed logistics, and the unshakable belief that Kevin Costner could do everything. Write, act, produce, direct, edit, survive storms, and charm audiences with a character who mostly just grunts and scowls. It's a film built on excess. Excess money, excess ambition, excess ego, and all of it sloshing around on a floating set that kept trying to sink itself out of shame. The story drowned in spectacle, the production drowned in poor planning, and the director nearly drowned in a sea of creative micromanagement. Honestly, it's a miracle this thing made it to the screen at all.